Hey, welcome to another episode of your Faith and Health Community. I'm your host, Pastor Jackie Jackson. And as always, on behalf of myself and our producer, Anita Alexander, we want to thank you for taking out time from your busy day to spend with us. Hopefully, prayerfully, we'll share some information with you that will improve your quality of life. Now, I just want to spend a few seconds to remind you about enrolling for health care. President Biden has extended the marketplace. So if you didn't get an opportunity to enroll back in November, December before it shut down, this is your opportunity to get enrolled for healthcare. So you can go to www.healthcare.gov and reach out. They have, if there's a language barrier, they have people that can speak within 27 or 127 different languages, so they can get you covered. If you don't meet the income requirements, in other words, if you're single and your income is $17,200 a year or less, that makes you eligible for Medicare, not Medicaid, yes, it is Medicaid. Boy, this is a bad day, right? It makes you eligible for Medicaid, which you can apply for all year round. It never shuts down. There is no such thing as closed enrollment. So you can get covered one way or the other. Make sure you get covered. Listen, I could go on about that. You know me. You've been around me long enough. You know I can talk about it for days. But I have a guest here that I'm very excited to have. I met this young man maybe less than a year ago, and the times that we've had conversations, we're a part of Everytown for Gun Safety together. We're in some groups where we have conversations, and I'm always intrigued by him. I'm going to first tell you who he is, and then I'm going to tell you why I have him on the show. His name is Michael Cech, and Michael is the founder and owner of True North Associates, LLC, a communications and business-to-business or B2B marketing constituency, offering advice based on his 40-year career as a journalist, government official, and international corporate executive. He is also a featured guest on The Place Where You Live, which is with Mike Allen at his former radio station, WRKI-FM I-95 in Danbury, Connecticut, where telling stories about local history and points of interest throughout Western Connecticut and Eastern New York State. He uses his air name in this endeavor. Michael also is dedicated to advancing the cause of gun violence prevention following his wife's involvement in the 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook School in Newtown. And I'm sure a lot of you remember this shooting. A horrible time, a lot of babies. Nobody wants to see babies. Nobody should ever even want to hurt a baby. I don't get it. But Michael, thank you for being on the show. You really appreciate you coming in.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you, Jackie.
And listen, just in case there's someone listening who does not remember the mass shooting at Sandy Hook, or just to kind of maybe to refresh your mind when you consider the fact, since 2012, how many mass shootings, how many individual shootings that we've had in the United States. I just want to give you just a little bit background information about Sandy Hook. So Sandy Hook Elementary School occurred on December 14th, 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut at approximately 9:35 in the morning. A deranged individual whose name we will not speak shot and killed 26 people, including 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7 years old, and 6 adult staff members. Earlier that day, before driving to school, he shot and killed his mother at their Newtown home. As first responders arrived at school, this individual committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. Personally, I wish that they would have been able to capture him and he had spent the rest of his natural life and some days after incarcerated, which is where individuals need to be as far as I'm concerned, but that's my opinion. I'll keep going. The incident is the deadliest mass shooting at an elementary school or high school in the United States history, and the fourth deadliest mass shooting overall. The shooting prompted renewed debate about gun control in the United States. I'm going to say about common sense gun laws, which is what's missing. Common sense gun laws. We're not saying we need to strip everybody of their guns, but we do need some common sense gun laws and some background checks. But I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. Including proposals to make the background check system universal, and for the new federal and state gun legislation banning the sale and manufacture of certain types of semi-automatic firearms and magazines with more than 10 rounds of ammunition. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If for some reason you need a 100-round capacity magazine to protect your house for people who you're saying are coming to get you, you are either in the middle of a zombie apocalypse or you need to change your lifestyle. And I guarantee you, you are not in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. So a November 2013 report issued by the Connecticut State Attorney General's office concluded that that deranged individual acted alone and planned his actions, but they provided no indication why he did what he did or why he targeted the school. A report issued by the Office of the Child Advocate in November 2014 said that this individual had Asperger syndrome, and as a teenager suffered from depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, but concluded that none of it had anything to do with his murderous acts. I'm not so sure. Other than this just being a horrible person, it's kind of hard for me to believe that you're saying all of those things and none of it had anything to do with it. But that's what the report says. Now, the report went on to say that his severe and deteriorating internalized mental health problems combined with an atypical preoccupation with violence and access to deadly weapons provided a recipe for mass murder. Now, under Connecticut law at the time, the 20-year-old was old enough to carry a long gun, such as a rifle or a shotgun, but too young to carry a handgun. So I'm confused. If you're too young to carry a weapon, you should be too young to carry a weapon. And you're talking about a long gun, a shotgun, which in some cases will do far more damage than a handgun. How about we make until you're 21? You're not eligible to carry any weapons at all. Again, that's my opinion. So I mentioned before, we're welcoming Michael Cech to the show. And I read his bio, but I want to mention that the reason why Michael is here, the reason why Michael has a connection is because of his wife, Yvonne Cech, who was the librarian at Sandy Hook. Yvonne has been credited with saving the lives of 22 people, including 18 students, by locking them inside a supply closet during the horrific 2012 massacre. So Yvonne is a hero. She is I think, Michael, that the word hero sometimes get tossed around too easily, too much. It's like it just pours out for anything. But what your wife did took a lot of courage. It took a lot of heart. It took a lot of saying that these babies are more important than anything else right now. And they're my charge, and I'm going to keep them safe. So since I can't say it to your wife, I'm going to say it to you. I give God glory and honor for her and people like her. And I thank you for coming on. Michael, welcome again to the show.
Jackie, thank you. And you and I speak from exactly the same perspective on that four-letter word hero, which my wife will not let me call her. She says very bluntly that she did what everybody would have done, which I dispute, but that's another thing. She said, really, we were all thrown into a horrible situation. We all did the best we could. What happened in her particular case was that she came face to face with the gunman. She didn't realize it was the gunman at the time. The gunman was tall. This is how she described him to me when I saw her after the shooting. She said, "Yeah, I caught my eye out the corner of my eye, and I turned and I looked. And when I turned and looked, he turned and looked at me, and our eyes met." She said he was tall, thin. He was wearing black clothes, a black hat, and a camo army vest, and he had a rifle. I said, "Sweetheart, that was not a police officer. That was the shooter." And she actually, and you understand this the more you spend time around people who have suffered from trauma from gun violence. She didn't want to believe. She didn't. She just didn't want to believe it. But she had a special adrenaline kick then that said our students in the library were hiding in their lockdown location, which was between two shelves of books. And she realized she had to get them into a place that was more secure. She did. She got them locked into the closet. They stayed there an hour and a half before the SWAT team got there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I first just want to thank you for having me on the show because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And you and I have gotten to know each other very well, thankfully, over the last year and a half. And I want to thank you for lending your considerable voice to this whole effort. It's always a treat when we see that Pastor Jackie's on the agenda because you lend a credibility and an insight that really is so rare in the clarity of your message. It's just amazing. I just wanted to say that. And the other thing I wanted to mention up front is that I sometimes, and we've talked about this, I sometimes feel troubled calling myself a gun violence survivor. And we've had this discussion in every town and other places. Uh, I wasn't at the epicenter that day. I didn't hear the gunshots. I didn't smell the gunpowder. I didn't hear the screams. I didn't hear the breaking glass. I didn't hear the cops running over the roof. I didn't see the frightened looks on the kids' faces in the closet for an hour and a half. I didn't see the teachers whose hands were shaking so badly they couldn't get their keys in the doors to lock them. I didn't see any of that. In fact, I wasn't even on this continent. I was in Germany when it broke out, and so I have trouble calling myself a gun violence survivor, except that when I stop and think about it, there are millions of people just like me out there who, yeah, we weren't at the epicenter. We're in those circles around trying to support the people who were there. And because in my wife's case, 8 years after Sandy Hook, she still has the trauma, she still has the PTSD, she still, little things that you don't really necessarily expect that can bring it all back in a rush. Um, when that happens, we're the ones here left to pick up the pieces and try and help her get through it. And that's the kind of gun violence survivor story that gets lost in the other debates too. And this is why it's a problem we should just get rid of. I mean, when we have natural disasters, hurricanes and tornadoes and floods, we build dikes and dams and houses that can withstand wind, and yet we have these unnatural disasters like gun violence, and we don't do anything about it. What
Right.
are we doing? Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm
No, 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 no. And you're absolutely right. And what I want to do, and I want to mention this, Mike, when we both know this, being involved with Every Town for Gun Safety. But from Every Town for Gun Safety's perspective, a survivor is anyone who has experienced some type of gun violence. Whether you are like myself, someone who was wounded by a gun, if you are someone who has lost, not lost, someone whose loved one was murdered, their life was taken by gun violence, if you've been robbed at gunpoint, if you've seen gun violence take place somewhere, maybe it wasn't you, but maybe you were across the street and you saw someone get shot, you saw someone get robbed. Any way that gun violence affects your life, that makes you a survivor of gun violence. And I think a lot of times, Michael, people don't realize when someone uses gun violence on one individual around the corner, the number of individuals affected by that is so great that a lot of times we don't think about it. You're talking, so it's one young man, one young woman that's shot down. He or she has a mother, a father, maybe a husband, a wife, a partner, children, cousins, nieces, nephews. You're looking at that community that's going to be suffering because of that gun violence. You've got to look at the store owners who would be in fear. My point is that it just continues to expand, and it's like a cloud or dust cloud. It may start small, but it spreads. So I wanted to say that since you mentioned that part, because a lot of people who are suffering from gun violence, who are survivors, don't get it. A lot of the Congress and Senate members don't get that they are survivors of gun violence after January 6th. But that's a whole nother story. We're here about Sandy Hook, so let me bring myself back in. I want to ask you a question, Michael, because I think this is really would be really good for people whose loved one has dealt with gun violence and trying, and especially if it's just now happening, and we know it could happen 50 years ago, it doesn't change how traumatizing it is. But for you to be able to walk your wife through, your daughter, your son, and yourself, can you just talk about how Sandy Hook has affected you all as a family and how you process through that?
Yeah, that's a it's a multifaceted answer, and I'll try and keep it as focused as possible. I would go back to the day it happened. So um, I'm going to talk first about my guilt. Uh, so here I was finishing up a business trip. I was in Germany. I was at the airport an hour and a half from takeoff. I had texted Yvonne earlier in the day and was surprised that she hadn't gotten back to me on I'd taken a picture of something in Germany that I thought would kindle a rekindle a memory because we used to live in Europe, and she didn't get back to me. And so I'm sitting in the lounge, the Lufthansa lounge, getting ready to fly back, and I see that on my cell phone I have a text message from my wife, and I'm going, "Oh, this is great! She's finally responding." And I'll never forget it. Jackie had said, "In case you hear, we're in lockdown. Shooting in our school is real. I'm okay, locked in the closet with Marianne, Cindy, and 18 kids." And I looked at that and I was like, what? You know, what? And so first thing I do is I text back to her. I said, shooting in your school, you okay? I mean, what's going on? Nothing. Probably the 6 longest minutes of my life were waiting for a response to that text. And in those 6 minutes, I was looking around the lounge. All the other people who were there were, drinking their coffee, their wine, eating a Wurst, a sausage, having, reading the newspaper. And I'm like, I'm getting panicky. And former reporter, I'm starting to imagine the worst, and I'm starting to think, okay, this is something I need to react to or respond to or take care of. So I ran over to the television monitor where CNN was broadcasting, and I'm looking at their faces because they all wear earplugs, and I'm looking to see if there's any indication on their face that they're hearing about a shooting in an elementary school, or just any tip off that they're going to have to break in with breaking news. Nothing. No banners across the bottom of the screen about reports coming in and shoot. So now I'm thinking, wow, Dawn Hochsprung, who was the principal of the school, used to run drills all the time because she took this very seriously. And she had been, my wife and Dawn were best friends. And so she had told me that Dawn was actually getting a little upset about the fact that people weren't taking these drills maybe seriously enough and weren't reacting quickly enough. So she was going to make them more realistic. And I thought, oh, that's it. She's made a very realistic drill. It's even fooled my wife. Well, then 6 minutes later, Yvonne comes on. They're running around, the police running around with guns. Uh, we think they've got them by now. Now, at this point, I realize this is real, but I still can't find any proof of it in Germany. I called my son on his cell phone, who was working about a mile away at a grocery store. Turns out he was on his way into the grocery store when I called him and I said, you haven't heard anything about a shooting at Sandy Hook? And he was like, what? And he said, Dad, I don't want to go to work. I said, don't go to work. Go to the scene. I said, just in case. I said, just go to the firehouse. It's nearby. Don't go anywhere close to the school in case it is real. But I need you to be my eyes and ears because I need to know what's going on, and you got to help your mom. So he goes over to the Sandy Hook firehouse. He was actually one of the first people on the scene, and he was there all day as the kids were coming out, and he was giving them hugs and handing them bottles of water because what they had seen was just horrendous. Um, and to make a very, very long story short, um, Christopher, to this day, 8 years later, is still affected by what happened that day. Ashley, my daughter, who's involved with Everytown, has made this her cause celeb. She's in college, about to do a final exam, and she gets this text, saying, that your mom's in trouble, and then I called her and said, look, this is the situation, and so we agreed she would, leave school and get into Danbury. Meanwhile, I had to fly home from Germany. I didn't get home for 15, 16 hours. And by the time I got home, my wife had played the stoic, stand up mom and whatnot until I got home. And then the poor woman just, collapsed. She was just literally emotionally drained at that point. And what had happened was the New York Times had called and she talked to them and she said, look, I don't want to be quoted. I don't want anything about me in this at all. They said, no, we just heard about the heroic stuff you did that, today. And we just wanted to see if you and the kids were all right. She goes, I really don't want to be quoted. She said, we're fine. The SWAT team got us out, blah, blah, blah. The New York Times not only quoted her, they gave her full name, spelling, quoted her, and sent it out. And it went on their website, which means it went international. So the phone started ringing off our hook. All the major networks started showing up on our front lawn. Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes was on the phone trying to get her onto 60 Minutes that Sunday. The shooting was on a Friday. ABC sent us a fruit basket, which I took apart because I was expecting a microphone was hidden inside. CBS, NBC, they were all just, CNN came over and Anderson Cooper. And it was unbelievable. So here I am trying to comfort my poor wife, and I'm going back into media relations mode, trying to take care of things. Christopher and Ashley, they're taking this in, but at the time you don't know how bad it is. And
Right.
what really happened, just to sum it all up, is that what people don't understand living outside this is, they see it on TV, they see the horrible situation, they go, oh my God, prayers and thoughts and all that. 8 years later, we all still have the effects. We see a little kid in the parking lot, a little 6, 7 year old in the parking lot. You look and you immediately think, oh my God, that's right. They were 6 and 7 year olds. You hear a car backfire. You're just like immediately, you use the word trigger point, or you talk about bullet points in a PowerPoint presentation, or you talk all of these little things. All of a sudden, the emotions come rushing back. I know I've taken too long to answer your question. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet now, but hopefully that's some insight.
Yeah, me, probably like everybody else in this country with a television that day, we're looking, we're watching, and emotions are welling up in people all across the country, all around the world. And I think that sometimes we forget about how I know it was painful for me because I love babies, I love children. And so the fact that somebody had enough evilness in them to want to hurt a child just kind of blows me away all by itself. But I'm watching, I'm feeling emotion. I'm amazed. I'm outraged. And for you, like you said, traveling, and I know I'm going back a little bit, but when you shared that with me the other day, it just hit me the fact that when you're in the exact same place with your loved one, and sometimes you feel helpless. You want to hug them, but hugging them doesn't change it. And what you had to deal with, not just sitting there waiting to come, you had to take a flight. And then I remember you said you got in LaGuardia. Did you come in LaGuardia? And then you still had to get to Connecticut. And the emotion, what you had to be dealing with, you mentioned earlier about feeling guilt. I know you've heard this 1,000 times, but I've just got to share it with you that, and especially for you, but also for somebody who may be listening that's in the same place, that does come into you, but you're not the culprit. You're not the sick individual. You're not the one with the weapon. You're not the one who planned such a horrific thing. And that doesn't change anything, and I know it, but I just like to say it to people to understand that you may feel some kind of guilt, but the guilt is not on you. And it's so horrible that victims have to carry a level of guilt because of what has happened to them or their loved one. I work with your daughter, Ashley. So at some point or another, almost every day, we're either on a Zoom because obviously we can't, all be in the same place, or we're on Slack. There's some contact. First of all, I think Ashley is great. I enjoy when I get a chance to talk to her. Watching your daughter with survivors, because we're on a survivor team with Everytown for Gun Safety, and watching your daughter navigate through the work that she does, watching the care and the love that she gives to survivors. And I'm not just saying this because you're on here, you know it, but this is how she is. It's so amazing that just what, 8 years now, eight, not 10, 8 years
8 years.
ago,
Yep.
what your family has endured, and that she has gotten that fire inside of her, and that desire and that will and that love and compassion to love on survivors who are going through, when I know there are days that she might be feeling really a lot of emotion. And I know there are times when I'm working with survivors, every now and then, I've had 8 family members murdered. So every now and then it creeps up on you. But watching the work that she does is definitely a testament, I believe, to the work that you and your family have done to rebuild, so to speak, if I can use it that way, yourself, your confidence, your faith in mankind, um, and just helping your wife, who again, I gotta say it again, I may say it a few more times, who is a hero for looking after people at the time, at the worst time. You never know who you are, right? We always talk about who we are. This is just how I am. You don't know who or how you are sometimes until you are in that position. And she's definitely there. I want to move on and ask a question. We're gonna show some slides in our next show when you come back. But I just got to talk about this before we get there. I got a chance to review the slides, and then I come to a slide with audio. And listening to that audio of 911, like I told you, I was sitting at home and I was just frozen listening to those calls. You have had a chance to review all of this information. So you have lived it over and over. I know you've gone around the country speaking about the situation, no, the murder at Sandy Hook. You've talked about your family. So you are constantly, as they say, re-traumatizing and re-traumatizing yourself. How do you manage, even right now? And I thank you so much again for sitting down with us and having this conversation. How do you manage to keep yourself sane, I guess, if I go that route?
There's a certain amount of, I guess, for lack of a better description, compartmentalization that has to occur. Uh, you said something very important when you said, I wasn't the guy with the gun, I wasn't the culprit. You have to put, you have to somehow put the emotions over here and put the facts over here. And I do talk about the emotions because I think it's important for people to understand the emotional impact. But when you really talk about the facts and focus on them, that's where you get into what you were talking about at the very start of this, which is, what do you do with common sense gun laws? what are the steps that have to be taken to avoid this? And that's when you have to deal with facts and say, okay, what caused it? What was that? So I listen, it's tough for me to listen to that tape. It's very tough. And particularly the part where the dispatcher is trying to pull this poor woman through it. And then she has to, right in the middle of it, just call out to everybody else, because this is one of the earliest calls. They still didn't know where the guy was in the school. And when she calls out, we have a, basically an all points bulletin here for everybody, shooting it. And it's still to this day goes right to my core 8 years later. It's hard for me to listen to because it just sort of brings it all back, the craziness. And it was only 6 minutes. 6 minutes. All this stuff happened before, from the moment he walked in, when the first calls came in, they recreated all that, or, put the timeline together. And when when police came in and when he shot himself, and all that was 6 minutes. And the devastation he caused in 6 minutes is remarkable. Doesn't do it. It just doesn't do it. It's truly unbelievable how much pain and carnage and ongoing ripple effects this gentleman caused. I shouldn't call him a gentleman. This guy caused in 6 minutes. And I think that I do this because I am so committed to trying to get people to understand how bad it is. This, I send our thoughts and prayers. I'm glad you do. And I don't want to belittle that for even a nanosecond, but that's no longer sufficient. We have to take.
Let me speak to that though, because I'm going to say, no, don't, listen, thoughts and prayer. I'm a pastor. I'm a faith person. That's who I am. Not by mistake. I'm that on purpose. But in the Bible, it tells us that faith without works is dead. In other words, sitting on your sofa going, I'm going to find a job, I'm going to get a job, but you haven't filled out your resume, you haven't updated your resume, you haven't made any phone calls, sent out your resume, you haven't reached out to your contacts, but you're just sitting on your sofa eating chips and watching more. Okay, I guess Maury isn't on, or whoever comes on saying, I'm going to get a job. That's your works. If you're talking about my faith, my prayers and thoughts, I'm going to get a job, then my works are me doing all the things I just mentioned. I got to fill out my resume. I got to update it. I got to send it out, because faith without works is dead. So when you talk about thoughts and prayers, especially the way we've gotten from politicians, when it's like there's a mass shooting, we've lost people, now is not the time to talk about it. Well, actually it is, but we send your thoughts and prayers. Then they do nothing else. So if all you're going to do is say thoughts and prayers, then I'm with you, Michael. This is how I feel. You can stuff your thoughts and prayers in a sack if there's not going to be some action. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but that's just something that people need to understand. The Bible, I don't know the Quran, I don't know the Torah, but the Bible says faith without works is dead. So when I hear politicians say thoughts and prayers, and then I hear them say, now is not the time to have discussion about common sense gun laws. Now is not the time to have discussion about red flag laws, background checks. Then to me, their thoughts and prayers, they could have just went ahead on and flushed them down the toilet, because that's all they mean to me. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I had
No, you're absolutely right, and I think we've over sanitized it. To be perfectly honest, you hear a report. Oh my God, there's been a mass shooting. You go and you turn on, the television, and you're watching the coverage, and all you see, thankfully, I guess, but all you see is the building and the police cars outside, and eventually some interviews. You don't see the reality of what happened inside. You didn't hear the gunshots. You didn't smell the gunpowder. Our senses are so important to this topic because that's what causes the trauma. It's we absorb what happened and then relive it, okay? Because it gets stored up here and in our nervous system and everywhere else. That's what trauma PTSD. And that's why I played this tape that you were talking about, not to be melodramatic, not to get people all upset, but to as close as I can bring people to the reality, including myself, of what happened that day. So you hear the gunshots, you hear the utter fear in poor woman's voice. And every time I've ever played that tape, the audience has left silent. And that's what I want. I want them to think. I want them to think long and hard, because God forbid I don't want to happen to them. And it's hard for them to understand because it hasn't happened to them. And pray
Right.
it does not.
And they watch a lot of movies. We're so desensitized by everything. We watch movies, and we see somebody get shot down, and then they're in the next movie, the next big blockbuster, or it's that, and we become so desensitized. The Bible says that my people perish for lack of knowledge. And knowledge comes in a lot of different ways. And what we're going to see on the next show with you, that's knowledge. That's information that people need. Because what you said, I told you when I listened, I just froze. It was like a deer in the headlight. I couldn't do anything else. So I'm getting that signal that we need to get ready to shut down. Michael, I want to thank you. We're going to have you right back. So I appreciate that. But still, I got to thank you again. I work with survivors, so I always hate when I re-traumatize a survivor, and I'm a survivor myself. So I understand what individuals are going through, but I appreciate you being here, and we're going to be back with you shortly. Listen, everybody. Gun violence, listen, 100 people a day. 100 people a day that we know of in the United States are shot, are killed, are shot and are killed by gun violence. That's 700 people a week that we know of. We've got to make some changes. If you are a survivor of gun violence, think you may be a survivor of gun violence, you have experienced gun violence, take out your phone right now. If you have your phone, just grab it. I know you got it because we all keep our phone near us. Take it out and text. Take it out and text right now, survivor. Text survivor to 63344. That's to Everytown for Gun Safety, Everytown Survivor Network. Somebody will reach out to you. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to be there for you, to support you. You are not by yourself. Listen, I'm Pastor Jackie Jackson. Again, on behalf of myself and our producer, Anita Alexander, we thank you. We thank you again, Michael Cech. We will be back with you shortly. You stay faithful. Stay healthy.